Mystic Aquarium. We're so happy to host you here today. My name is Katie Kubina, and up until recently, I've been serving as the Senior Vice President for Mission Programs here at Mystic Aquarium. And upon Dr. Stephen Cohn's recent retirement, I'm also serving right now as the Acting President and CEO. So we are just thrilled to welcome all of you here today. We are here to celebrate Equinor's community discussion of their plans to deliver clean, renewable power to households across the Northeast. And we're really excited that Equinor selected this particular venue to continue their efforts to educate Connecticut residents about the details of their Beacon Wind project. So our mission here at Mystic Aquarium is to inspire people to care for and protect our ocean planet through conservation, education, and research. And through the mission programs area, which also includes exhibits, we really take that seriously as it relates to the oceans and the current global biodiversity and climate crisis that we're facing here. So a number of our research programs are focused on the issues around climate. One example is we do work up in the Arctic with native indigenous groups. And as we know, the Arctic and some may say areas around the Gulf of Maine and New England are really the ground zero for climate change. We're seeing those impacts more on the land and on the ocean. And the ocean's been pretty much taking the heat for climate change for some time and has been incredibly resilient over the years. But now we are beginning to see through shifting species and shifting stocks that our oceans are in fact changing and in fact warming. And one of our senior research scientists, Dr. Peter Oster, is looking at those looking at ecosystems from that lens. And some of his work here in Long Island Sound has actually identified some of the first casualties of climate change. So species that were already on sort of the edge of their range and not terribly abundant, going locally extinct. So this is a very powerful area for us. We have an exhibit on our mezzanine, which is above the main floor of our gallery, that's entitled Ocean Solutions, because as a public aquarium, we don't want families to come here and leave depressed. We want them to come here and leave inspired. So in that Ocean Solutions gallery, and I hope you will visit it sometime if you haven't already, we are really looking at the climate and biodiversity crisis through the lens of how can the oceans help mitigate that. And one of them is through the creation of marine protected areas, which become more resilient areas in the ocean for species and biodiversity to thrive. And the other is renewable ocean energy, and through a partnership with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and of course some of the offshore wind companies in the area, we're featuring both marine energy, water power technology, and offshore wind. In order to reach our nation's objectives as it relates to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, including right here in the state of Connecticut, I believe there's a call for a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. There's a lot of work to do in a short amount of time. And we also feel very strongly about walking the talk here. So we just had delivered, you might see as you leave, pallets of solar panels, which will be installed on our roofs shortly. We have more electric charging stations now than we ever did before. We've conducted a greenhouse gas emission audit so that we have a baseline from which to benchmark our progress for reducing greenhouse gas emissions on our campus. And have enacted a number of other energy savings devices with the support of the state of Connecticut and the Green Bank. So it takes a village, and this is such a great community, and we're so grateful for all of the support that we have. And we're really excited to be working together in partnership with offshore wind companies to better understand and mitigate the risks or potential threats to ecosystems, to marine mammals, et cetera. So we're here in the game to make this happen and see that there's a forward path towards the responsible development of offshore wind in this region. So you will learn this evening that Equinor believes in the cooperative coexistence of offshore wind development with wildlife and marine industries, and I hope you enjoy the program this evening. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Cunningham and Kristen Keller from Equinor's Beacon Wing stakeholder team. Thank you very much. So happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that introduction. We're just incredibly grateful to be here tonight and really grateful for the community for hosting us. Also want to give our thanks to our friends at the Eastern Chamber of Commerce of Connecticut for the huge push in sharing this event and getting that out to the whole network there as well. And just, welcome everyone and happy Monday. Great way to start the week, right? We also have a few elected officials here tonight that we'd like to acknowledge. First, we have State Senator and Chair of the Connecticut General Assembly's Energy and Technology Committee, Norm Needleman. Norm, if you want to raise your hands. We also have State Representative David Michel. David, thanks so much for being here. And then I just want to make sure we're not missing any elected officials. Nope, good, all right. First, Equinor, we always start with a safety moment. So we do want to let everyone know that we have a safety kit at the front right when you checked in, if there is any need, Band-Aids and whatnot. We also have a Spanish translator here tonight. Kay, if you want to raise your hand. If anyone needs Spanish translation, she's right there in the back corner. And more than happy to help with that. All right, first our agenda. Let me see if I can get this going. Fabulous. So we have a number of Equinor staff here tonight to listen to you and also share a little bit more about what they do. So we're going to have them all come up here and introduce themselves and also share where they'll be around the room during the open house section. Then Tom and I have about 20 or so minutes of slides just to give an overview of the company as well as the Beacon Wind project. And then there'll be about an hour for that open house where you can go around the room and ask questions of our specialists. Then at 7:15, we'll announce those door prizes that I'm sure you heard about at the front, which include tickets to visit the aquarium, bring your families, as well as a VIP tour, which is really exciting. But why don't we start with those team introductions, and Tom, my co-host, will get started on that. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And thank you all to our guests, especially for coming. Katie, really appreciate your hospitality. So we're just going to introduce our team so that you have a sense of the names and faces so that you can deploy your Q&A directly to the right experts. I think we would love to give a presentation and just move through it and then let the Q&A happen in that informal setting if that works for everyone. So in that spirit, let's just keep moving through. I don't want to keep you guys all night. I'm Tom Cunningham. I'm the stakeholder manager for the Beacon Wind project and support other public affairs roles within the renewables business. Been in Equinor 5 years. And why don't we just ask my team to come on up and very quickly introduce yourselves in front of the mic. Julia? And the reason we're doing that in front of the mic is because we're recording this to post online.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Julia Lewis. Thanks, Tom. And I'm the permitting director for the Beacon Wind project, and I'll be located at that first poster where you see the teal map right by the door.
Good evening. I'm Amanda Shane. I'm the Director of Industry Relations for Equinor. I'll be stationed over at the local investment and workforce development poster by the door.
Yeah, good evening, folks. Glad to be here. I'm Simon Underwood. I'm the Marine and Logistics Manager for Beacon Wind. I've been with the company since 2017, and prior to that, 22 years in the military. I don't have a poster to stand by, so I'll be standing around here. If you have any particular questions about marine operations, then I may have some pictures to share. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Good evening, all. Alex Gomez, Principal Electrical Engineer. I'll be stationed right over here in front of this little cable mock-up we have.
Good evening, everybody. EJ Marone, the Marine Affairs Manager, which means I do fisheries issues as well as maritime navigation issues. I'll be at the fisheries poster, conveniently located next to the water over there. So, thanks.
In the Coast Guard for how long?
Coast Guard, 27 years before I
Good evening, everyone. Anna Fusek, I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the Beacon Wind in Queens, over the water in New York. And I'll be not by EJ the person, I'll be by the EJ poster, environmental justice poster, also kind of by the water. So thank you, everybody.
Hi everyone, I'm Harriet Green. I'm the Operations Manager for our Beacon Wind project. So I've been in the industry coming up to a decade now, but in the UK. So anything regarding long-term operations and maintenance, you can come find me by the technical poster over here.
Good evening, everybody. Elizabeth Marchetti, Fishery Liaison Officer with over 20 years as a field scientist and fisherman. I'll be joining EJ over by the fisheries poster by the water.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Lenow. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Long Island, so working across the stakeholder teams in all the regions. I will be floating around the room, happy to answer any questions or help direct questions as they come about. Thanks.
Thanks, all. Okay, introducing Equinor. So to start, Equinor, we're a broad energy company. Our headquarters is in Norway. We're in 30 countries, and we have approximately 20,000 employees worldwide. We've been in the US since the 1980s, with an office in Stamford, Connecticut since 1993. We have a clear ambition to be a leader in the energy transition with more than a decade of experience in offshore wind globally and as an industry leader. And we really like this map because it gives us scale, a good idea of our scale in the US, as well as our global ambitions. And our goal is really to continue to deepen our engagement in select regions, and of course, that means our East Coast cluster. So, who are we? Equinor, we're very much a values-driven company. We have a clear purpose, vision, and strategy, and this really does impact how we do business and how we develop out our projects. We're committed to net zero by 2050, and we'll be able to develop that only by growing out our renewable portfolio. So by 2026, we anticipate having 4 to 6 gigawatts of renewable capacity, and by 2030, we anticipate having 12 to 16 gigawatts of renewable capacity. I'm really proud to say that that's 5 years earlier than we initially anticipated. So our values really do drive our community-based development model, and for us, how we deliver is just as important as what we're delivering. So this includes respect for the environment, engaging and communicating actively with stakeholders, even before we have all of those answers. We're really committed to creating local jobs, working with unions, investing in communities, sourcing in the US whenever possible, collaborating with fisheries, environmental justice groups, frontline communities and tribal communities, as well as respecting historical properties, and of course, transparency. All right, now drilling down on our US activities in the Beacon Wind project. So as I'm sure a number of you have heard, President Biden set a target of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, and the Northeast has some of the most ambitious clean energy goals across the states in the US. And we very much acknowledge that it's the important, support and action of many individuals and many groups in this room that have really been critical in advocating for those goals. So we wanted to thank you for that here tonight. And we also understand our accountability to you, and that we have to contribute to that wind energy and contribute to those goals. For Equinor, all of our wind development in the US is a 50-50 joint partnership with BP, with Equinor as the operator. As you can see here on this map, we have our 3 current projects. We have Empire Wind 1, Empire Wind 2, and Beacon Wind 1. Empire is in federal waters off the New York Bight and will bring power into Brooklyn and Long Island. Combined with Beacon Wind 1, these projects will supply 3.3 gigawatts of power, which is enough to power 2 million homes to New York State. Our focus tonight, of course, is Beacon Wind, given where we are this evening. And Beacon Wind is a lease area in federal waters south of Massachusetts. So that's 20 miles south of Nantucket and 60 miles east of Montauk, for a little bit of context. We were awarded this offshore acreage to develop with a federal lease auction in 2019. And you'll see with the map that this lease is nestled among a number of other areas being developed by other offshore wind developers. Then in 2021, for a bit of history, we were awarded by the state of New York a purchase and sales agreement for 1,230 megawatts of offshore wind power from this lease area, and that's what we call our Beacon Wind 1 project. So please do note in looking at the map, and I wish I could gesture a little better and speak into the microphone clearly, but Beacon Wind 1 only fills the first half of the lease area. We're actively looking for opportunities to subscribe the power from Beacon Wind 2, and that's the gray area of the lease area. So that is the lease area and our commitments with New York. So let me explain how we'll make this project a reality. All right, so if you could please just indulge me for a quick overview of offshore wind technology. Many of you in the room, I'm sure, are well aware of this, but some of you may not be. So a little bit of background about the resource. Wind blows stronger and more consistently offshore than it does onshore. And the waters off of Long Island in New England have some of the world's best offshore wind resources. Importantly, offshore wind provides energy where and when we need it. So it's close to population areas, and wind blows strongest during peak times of energy use. So that's in the morning when we're getting ready, and in the evening when we're coming home. So these turbines, they capture those strong ocean winds, and they convert it to clean, zero emissions electricity, which is carried through a series of cables to an offshore substation, then to a substation on land, and then at that point it's distributed to our grid. So offshore wind projects go through federal, state, and local jurisdictions, which means we have to go through a rigorous permitting process at multiple levels. So we have the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management at the federal level, and we have New York State's Public Service Commission at the state level. We also must go through local regulations at the point of interconnection. We're also working closely with New England stakeholders that have some oversight and jurisdiction, and that includes the Rhode Island Special Area Management Plan, as well as the Connecticut Blue Plan for Long Island Sound, and Tom will go into that a little bit. All right, so this is probably the most useful image for you here today. The shape on the left is my right. Your left is the Beacon lease area. So we'll install about 80 wind turbine generators in the northern half of the lease area for Beacon Wind 1. So that's all of the yellow part and part of the purple area. They'll be fixed to the ocean floor in a 1-by-1 nautical mile grid layout. And you can kind of see on the screen the points within the lease area. And so Equinor and neighboring developers, we agreed with fishermen and federal and state officials to this fixed layout to create a predictable grid so fishermen and others could navigate within the area. There'll also be an offshore substation at one of those points, and the power will flow into that substation, then to an export cable to an onshore substation near the point of interconnection to the grid. Our point of interconnection for Beacon Wind 1 is in Astoria, Queens, and we have our O&M hub in South Brooklyn, which is really exciting as we're helping revitalize the area, all while maintaining its historic character. We're also working with suppliers to build the first offshore wind tower manufacturing facility at the Port of Albany in upstate New York, and the plans to have commercial operations, and that means first power, by the late 2020s. Okay, this slide right here is really great as it can show the water depths within the lease area and really the incredible scale of these wind turbine generators. Just for perspective, one rotation can power a home for 1.5 days. This also shows the maximum size of our turbines, which could be 1,086 feet. And then here's a sketch of our project timeline. So we're currently in a phase of extensive and careful studies and surveys of the lease area and the cable route. We're working to understand the wind and water conditions, as well as marine and wildlife behavior, seabed conditions on the site within the cable route, and so on. Next will be important filings at the state and federal level. And Tom will go into that a little bit more in a moment. And only then, after that, will we begin construction in 2025 when those preparations are completed. And as I said earlier, our plan is to generate first power in the late 2020s. So now I'll hand the mic over to Tom, and he'll get into some more of those specifics of Beacon Wind 1. Oh, and you got a laser pointer. I'm jealous.
I feel like a house cat. Thanks, Kristen. I think we don't have copies of the slides available, but we will be posting this all online. So it'll be on the website. Yeah.
We have everyone's emails who signed up, so we can give you that heads up as well after the meeting.
Thank you. So again, Tom Cunningham, I'm going to go through the cable route just to bring more attention and detail, given it's going through the Long Island waters, and I think that's very important for this community to be fully aware of, fully informed about. And then second, a little bit about our environmental considerations. Third, a little bit more about workforce, and then we'll wrap and break. So as Kristen mentioned, the cable route will flow through federal waters into the Long Island Sound. And now in that inset, you can see how it will weave through the East River into some point here in the Ditmar-Steinway area. And it's going to be running through a high voltage direct current cable. It actually, I think, is the longest one for an offshore wind project that so far, and going straight into Astoria, Queens. And the going into Astoria, Queens is really exciting for a couple of reasons. One, it is previously developed industrial land, so it's not going through any public property or through any environmental areas in terms of shoreline. It's going to be somewhere, it's not going to float in the water like it looks here, but that'll give you a sense of the size, and it'll be located, the substation will be located somewhere on that industrial land. But that means it will require minimal onshore routing to bring the power into the grid, as opposed to, say, coming in on Long Island somewhere. It can't go into New England because that's a different ISO, so it's a different grid. So it has to go into New York City. And the other thing that's really great about it is that it is in that part of Queens. It's an area that's been historically negatively impacted by fossil fuel energy. And so we'll be bringing renewable energy right into this environmental justice community, in a way being kind of tangibly the energy transition in that community, which is really exciting. We like to think, we've been, some stakeholders in that community have talked about it being Asthma Alley, that inhalers are so prevalent there that kids show them off at recess, comparing them like they're Pokemon or something. So one stakeholder called it transitioning from Asthma Alley to Renewable Row. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that a little bit later. Now, our approach to developing this cable route, first of all, in terms of selecting the route, we were working hard to select a route that has minimal onshore disruption. We're taking lessons learned from past cable and pipeline installations that already exist in the Sound. And if we can stress one thing above all, we're doing everything we can to minimize impacts to the environment. And again, on that minimal disturbance, as I mentioned on the last slide, all about minimizing the onshore disturbance. The landfall area is completely contained, doesn't cross homeowners' land, and minimal impacts to green or wild space. We're working with the New York State and Army Corps of Engineers to install within a specified corridor. We'll be granted a permit to install within that. And so the line you see represents our assessment of the most suitable cable path within that permitted space. And we anticipate, based on that route, 21 or so anticipated crossings based on the assets that are currently installed or will be installed by the time our project is in that development phase. And lastly, we're delivering power directly into New York City. Per our contract with New York State, we were asked to interconnect into the New York grid at what's called Zone J, or New York City. So to deal with all the congestion into this population center, a route through water was seen to be the most important. And to stress to this community in particular, we fully recognize the importance of the Long Island Sound Blue Plan. I'm sure many of you are aware of it, and the inclusive and comprehensive process behind it. We know that it represents an important move by the state and other stakeholders, including Sea Grant, CT, the Nature Conservancy, Yukon, to really create a comprehensive assessment of the ecology and of the existing uses to help make better decisions about additional uses so that we can have good environmental and human coexistence in the most environmentally safe way and in the most transparent way. And therefore, this Blue Plan does help guide our own approach to the cable route. And we use it as a resource to ensure that our project is compatible with its vision for the Sound. We also recognize that the Connecticut has a new designation of a National Estuarine Research Reserve by the federal government, and we look forward to continuing our dialogue with these environmental agencies and other stakeholders to fully understand any implications it might have on our plans, as well as what implications it may have for other uses in the water. And we have a continuing dialogue with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, with the University of Connecticut, the Nature Conservancy, and other stakeholders. We're very interested in having this open dialogue, talking to them in detail about our plans and the what and the why behind those plans. We really appreciate their support and guidance as we work towards this shared vision of a clean energy future for the Northeast. This is just quickly to show a slide with more detail about those waters. So purple is the Rhode Island SAMP, Special Area Management Plan, so where they have some environmental considerations in federal waters. And then you can see it runs entirely through the New York waters of the Long Island Sound, but I want to be explicit here that we don't see that as any kind of a way to, that despite that we are committed to being as open and transparent and collaborative with Connecticut stakeholders about this cable route. Here's another one I think is very interesting to show all the existing cables that are running. I know it's kind of a crazy slide, but you can see the blue line. This is the export cable route, and then it's green when it's in the state waters. But these others, these are existing cables and then existing pipelines of natural gas and other things. This is a fiber optic cable that crosses the Atlantic, and you can see we've worked to follow those existing routes as much as possible, and you get a sense of where some of those crossings would be. Talking about cable crossings is important from a perspective of fisheries or other things that may need to know what's going on the seafloor, and we have a very careful plan for installation of cables in those places where we can run an HVDC cable in one run. It would look like this on the left with all of these parameters for depth, parameters for a narrow plow, and then it'd be filled in and covered up. These show some schematics of what the cables would look like, and you'll get more details from Alex over here. And this is just another image to show that in cases where you would cross what they call another asset, like another cable or pipeline, how carefully we would work to ensure that what we do has a skirt or other protection over it, so that no damage occurs or impacts to not only the existing asset, but anything that would happen on top, say if a net or an anchor was dragging. So to industry values, before I wrap, we really appreciate in New York, the contract with New York, it's not just about offshore wind for the clean energy and the climate change benefits, it's also about building a workforce, a supply chain of the future, and doing it in an inclusive way. So breaking that down, we're investing heavily in local ports and regional supply chains. We are very proud to be converting the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which has had no activity on it for 30 years, into a modern offshore wind staging facility. It's going to be one of the largest ones in the U.S. at 73 acres. It's going to have 1,000 short-term jobs and 200 long-term jobs. That's really exciting, and we also appreciate that short-term jobs may be short-term for us, but they can go on and work for other developers and other projects. So it really is career creating. Similarly, in the Port of Albany in upstate New York, we are working with Marmon and Welcon, two companies, to produce the first offshore wind tower manufacturing facility in the U.S., and it will produce components for both the Empire and Beacon projects, also with quite a few jobs, and in operation as early as next year. And in terms of workforce, we're building relationships with local academic institutions. We fully appreciate it's not just about creating the jobs, it's about bringing the training and also the education before it. We're all working together, I think, the supply chain, labor, and other groups to create jobs that either that need to be transitioned or that don't exist yet. So we want to work together to build that from the ground up. And that's why we hired Amanda, and it's really exciting stuff. And to also stress, this is a just transition. This is about making sure that workers at risk of being left behind are included in this new economy. And that could be due to diversity and inclusion issues or equity. It could also be from people who have worked in other industries that may be phasing out in the energy transition. We're very mindful of this, very interested in working with everybody to make it happen. Here's a quick snapshot of some of the companies that have a major U.S. presence that we're working with, either in the U.S. or globally. Just to give a snapshot, the Empire projects are further along in their supply chain. Beacon has only made a few announcements about who will be its main suppliers. But again, we're here in advance of some of this information to be open and available to you, and we can keep you updated as this develops. We're also really interested in what Connecticut can bring to the industry. We know you've got a robust aerospace and marine industry here. That's the kind of thing that can transition very readily to bring the high level of technological precision and excellence to the new offshore wind industry. Super exciting, and we'll be looking forward to working with you as closely as possible. Last thing, I think, environmental stewardship. Our contracts with New York include $47 million or $52 million in community benefits specific to New York, but it also includes $25 million to support the regional monitoring of wildlife and key commercial stocks. That's regional, that includes the New England region. And our permitting and stakeholder teams, which is Julia and Tom and everyone here, are developing the foundation for that funding distribution and developing a disbursement structure in key priority areas. And we welcome your input on that. I would just also mention that our contracts with New York include not just bringing power for a certain price, but all of those workforce development and community benefits and regional funds baked in. This is a contractual obligation we have with New York. It's very exciting, and it's a great example of how offshore wind can deliver all these co-benefits in a way that are really helpful for society as a whole. Quick snapshot to show some of the aerial studies, some of the surveys we've conducted. Tons of different surveys going on right now and in the past. The aerial surveys we started in 2019, one of the first ones. The information from the 2 years of studies are publicly available. You can get those from us because you can't click on that here, but you can dive through. And these are just snapshots of different things captured either in the air or in the water during these survey runs that we've done. But it's just another way to demonstrate how much we're investing to fully understand not just the waves and wind conditions, but also the environmental conditions, impacts, what's going on in the space. So just to wrap up, our role here as stakeholders is to be an interface between the project and stakeholders, the public, anyone who's interested or anyone who has skin in the game. And our role is to be open and available to you. We've created a specific website for Beacon Wind. It's not just at equinor.com, it's at beaconwind.com, and all sorts of ways to get in touch with us. We had a meeting in Western Connecticut that was virtual. This one's much more exciting for me. So we want to bring all those things to the public. So there's lots of ways to be involved, and we place ourselves at your disposal. So we're going to break now. If you want to bring up the lights, I hope that has been somewhat stimulating. We'll wait. We'll find out who's asleep when the lights come up. It's actually this button.
Hey, Tom, could I just ask a generic question?
You may.
So, great overview. I guess my concern is when you put all these kilowatts into one location in New York City, what is that network like? And thank God you aren't going into Texas that couldn't handle the volume of energy or electricity that, pump into the system. My concern with a lot of electrical energy is that it's all fine and dandy, but when you put it into the backbone of the network out there, it's putting it into like a two-way road that needs to be a superhighway that can't handle the electricity that's coming into the system. So who's rebuilding those networks? Eversource?
No, great question, and an easy one. Just kidding. Alex is here who can go into detail, but I would just quickly answer to say, my thought is this correlation between a power plant, which is a fixed asset, generating electricity in one location straight into the grid there. Dittmar Steinway has a strong point of interconnection given the existing, not always actively used, fossil fuel generation. So in a way, that is a place that is not a dirt road where we're trying to shove 800 rows of cars, but rather where the infrastructure exists. And indeed, our contract, when you saw that first grid, how it works, the point of interconnection where we deliver the power becomes the state and I think the utilities that are regulated by the state's responsibility to bring it into the grid. Congestion's a massive issue, and I think that's why the options are not massive or numerous, right? But that's the great thing about Astoria, is that a lot of that infrastructure for the grid exists. But let me stop there and let people wander around, if that's okay. Can I thank everyone? David?
Quick question, not in French, in English.
Okay.
Just to establish this, what technique for the footing, because everything about the water doesn't change, but underwater it's a different story. What footing are you using for those turbines?
I think we have not a defined, agreed foundation. Julia, you look like you want to answer that. But she's right here behind you, Michelle. But let's break and take that answer here. Let's break up because I want to let everyone sort of wander around and free people from being trapped. I'm not evading the question. Thank you, everybody.